Hello, Alex here, and in this video I want to talk about the latest from Harman Photo, Harman RED, a 35mm Redscale run of Harman Phoenix 200 that I totally called last summer. Let's get into it. So full disclosure, Harman Photo did send me a few rolls of Harman RED so I could try it out, have this video ready for launch day, but also to create some images for the marketing material. At the tail end of 2023, Harman Technology Limited, the parent company for Ilford Photo and Harman Photo, spun up the Harman Photo brand and released their first ever colour film, Phoenix 200. The idea behind this project was to prove that they could produce a colour film using their existing black and white manufacturing equipment and expertise. It was never going to be the highest quality film on earth. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day and neither was Portra 400. But they definitely proved that they have the technical and chemical ability to produce a colour film. Harman Phoenix 200 has a lot of limitations, like its difficulty in scanning with certain setups, its limited exposure latitude, and its very coarse grain relative to the box speed of 200. But for me and a lot of other people, it's more about what it represents. It's about another player getting into the colour manufacturing game, securing millions of pounds in capital funding and investment, and really throwing themselves at this project to put someone else on the market that isn't Kodak. And I think they've done a really good job so far. The latest thing to come out of that project while we wait for Phoenix 2 is Harman RED. Throughout 2024, one of my bigger projects was the Mastering Harman Phoenix project, where I wanted to show that you could do a lot more with this emulsion than just shoot it at 200 and develop it in C41. Whether it's exposing, pulling, cross-processing, red scaling, or bleach bypassing, there are so many ways you can use this film, and most of them look pretty good. And in my opinion, a lot of them, especially if you're talking about pull processing or overexposing, look a hell of a lot better than just shooting it at 200. But one of the things that really stood out was red scaling, because Harman Phoenix 200 has a lot of properties that make it really ideal for red scaling. The two in particular that make it the most applicable are the quite clear base with a very low density, meaning you're going to see very minimal loss of light when you red scale, and hopefully not much light scattering that would reduce resolution. And the other being its very high sensitivity to the colors red and green, which you'll see in a second are very, very important for red scale photography. When you red scale a film, you literally just take the emulsion and flip it over inside the canister or on the spool or in your holder and expose it through the film base and expose the color layers in the wrong order. This gives photos with a gorgeous color palette ranging from red through yellow towards green depending on your exposure, and sure enough, Harman Phoenix 200 was an amazing candidate for red scaling, with minimal loss of light, great retention of sharpness, and a beautiful orangish tonality that I found a lot more flexible than a lot of other red scale films. Of course, I wasn't the only person to try red scaling Phoenix. It isn't that unique an idea if you know what to look for in a film, but it was quite funny that a few of us did this around the same time in 2024. When I found out that Harman Photo were actually working on red scaling Phoenix for the same reasons though, I felt pretty good about myself. And that has led to, finally we get to the point, Harman RED. This is a commercially made red scale run of Harman Phoenix 200, and the fact that it's commercially available matters a lot more than you might think. Harman RED is available in the 35mm format only, and each canister contains 36 exposures and has a DX code for ISO 125. When I was playing around with red scaling Phoenix last year, this is what I myself found works best, and this is how I like shooting Phoenix, because it gives a good balance between maintaining good film speed, not clipping the red channel, for lack of a better word, and falling within the relatively limited contrast and dynamic range that Phoenix has, and overall it's kind of the safest bet even on a bright sunny day. I can already see some people trying to say that this is something to do with the ISO 126 densitometric ISO of Phoenix. It has nothing to do with that. It's just because of the nature of red scaling film and the light loss that comes from only really using 2 of the 3 emulsion layers. I keep referencing Harman Phoenix because it is the same emulsion at heart, so it's coated on that same low density acetate base that might turn purple after processing, but I showed before that's completely irrelevant. It doesn't actually change anything in your images, and it's still designed for development in the standard C41 color development process, making development widely available just about everywhere. My rolls don't have this just yet, but the little cap on the plastic canister for the production rolls will also be red, which is quite nice. Like I said, the fact that it's a commercially available red scale film is actually quite a big deal in terms of overall usability. Firstly, the fact that I didn't have to cut my own leader, like this homemade Redscale roll of Phoenix I have, means I didn't lose that piece of film that I had to cut off because the leader would be the wrong way around when you flip the emulsion. And that can cost 1 to 2 frames, giving you a 34 to 35 exposure roll rather than 36. The second is that when I cut and retaped the emulsion, it's now taped to the spool inside the canister rather than actually, properly hole punched and secured to it. So there's a risk that I could advance too hard and rip that tape and then have to unload the camera in the dark bag or something like that. You could also just ruin the film by scratching it or accidentally exposing it to light when you're red scaling it yourself at home. And lastly, just the fact that the DX code is wrong. In the case of Phoenix, you're talking about a 2/3 of a stop error, but with a lot of films, that could be 2 to 3 stops off. So the fact that you could use this in not this, Harman RED in a point and shoot without, exposure compensation or ISO control matters a lot more. Aside from being a commercially available Redscaled film, it's another commercially available Redscaled film. At the time of recording, there are only 2 on the market: Lomography's Lomochrome Redscale and Kono's Rotwild, and who knows how long that's going to be around. The longest standing film is the Lomo film, and having another player in the very limited Redscale space is just nice to see. This emulsion's high sensitivity to the color green gives you a more balanced negative, giving you good density in both the green forming and red forming layers, unlike some other films, effectively giving you more tonal range in post. The images natively lean more towards the yellow and orange rather than pure monochromatic red, so it isn't literal red scale, which is actually a good thing, because it means, there's no single look with red scale films. You can kind of play around with it, go shot by shot or by your personal taste, and either lean towards the more yellow greenish kind of look or towards the blood red look, depending on what you want to do. You have a lot more flexibility that you wouldn't have with some other emulsions, because the look isn't kind of just baked in right from the get-go. I do feel like a bit of a looping soundbite here, but that low density acetate base is a huge asset to this film as a red scale film because the minimal loss of light keeps it usable. ISO 125, that's totally fine. You're losing 2/3 of a stop from the box speed of 200 for Phoenix. A lot of other films, when you red scale them, you lose 2 to 3 stops, some as many as 4. Those are less common. So being able to retain more of the native film speed is absolutely great. And the fact that it's quite a clear base as well means you're not diffusing the light as much, retaining more sharpness than with some other emulsions. It's still not the sharpest red scale film, but with Phoenix, you don't want to lose what sharpness you have, and I think it performs pretty well, all things considered. At the time of recording, I don't have the confirmed final launch price for Harman RED, but it is expected to come in at around the price of Phoenix or very slightly higher. In 35mm in Europe right now, Phoenix sells for about 13 to 15 euros per roll, and Harman RED's competitors sell for 16 to 17 euros per roll. So if it comes in the 15 euros-ish kind of region, 15.50 maybe, it's going to undercut its competitors, and the stuff in these cans is better for Redscale, as you'll see soon, making it have a much stronger value proposition, because, okay, if you're paying less, you might expect less suitable film, but this stuff is absolutely magnificent for Redscale, and if it's cheaper, that's just another bonus. I admit we are so many turtles down the hierarchy of niches here, but Phoenix has strong yellow to orange halation. We're shooting Redscale, which means the halations do glow around like point sources and high contrast edges, but they blend in with the image a lot more, and I know a lot of people don't mind halation but don't like the color of Phoenix's halations. Here that's not a problem at all, because like I say, it's just part of the Redscale look anyway. Harman RED is derived from Harman Phoenix, so you do still have to be mindful in terms of your exposure and the relative size of your subject within the frame. Clipping your highlights, your shadows is relatively easy, and the coarse grain relative to the box speed is a bit more pronounced in this case because you're shooting at 125. So finely detailed landscapes, not really a strength of this emulsion, but architecture, portraits, wildlife, at least close up, that kind of thing, that's not going to be a problem. And the latitude is limited, but it's not exactly the catastrophic deal that I think a lot of people make it out to be. It's not like we're talking about slide film here. I shot one of the rolls for this video in the Olympus XA. This is a point and shoot with a plus 1.5 stop lever for backlighting. That's it. I'm not exactly spot metering here, and all of those images came out perfectly fine. Because the master rolls of film are cut a certain way and then have to be rolled the other way around after they've rested for a while so that they can actually be loaded into the canisters with the emulsion facing the other way, mechanically the film might kind of just face the other way around, and that might make it a bit finicky to load. I did find one of my rolls was a bit tricky, the others were fine. The other thing is that when you're loading it into a reel, if you use reel-based development, the emulsion is now touching the reel rather than facing inwards, so you're going to see undeveloped or blotchy development of the rebate at the edges. The images itself are going to be, themselves are going to be completely fine, but if you were, home developing, you're going to see these blotchy patches, and it might give you cause for concern, but it's fine. It's normal for red scale photography. Or in another incredibly niche thing, if you're doing full frame sprocketed panoramic photography like in a medium format camera, then you're going to have uneven development or parts of your image just missing in the rebate, and that might be something you just need to be aware of. This is a limited run, just like Phoenix itself, and it's not going to be around long term. I don't know how long Harman RED is going to be manufactured, but once it's gone, Kono Rotweld will eventually stop being made as well, I'm sure, and then we'll just be back to the Lomo film again, which I really don't like, if that's not clear already. And similarly, it's not available in 120, and it's not going to be available in 120, which is a massive bummer. This stuff is incredible, and I would love to shoot it in one of my medium format cameras. But that option just isn't available. We still have some watch time, so if you thought I was just going to share my thoughts and wrap up, absolutely not. You know I gotta play around with this film a little bit. I set up my usual test scene downstairs and I wanted to run a comparison between Harman RED, Lomo Redscale and Kono Rotweld, but unfortunately the Kono film didn't arrive in time, and knowing my luck it'll probably arrive like an hour before this video goes live. I just shot each of these two films across a 3-stop exposure range, so 50 to 200 for the Lomo film and 125 plus or minus 1 stop for Harman RED, just to see how they compare. This is focusing on a Negative Lab Pro workflow, and the results will differ depending on your setup, but I still have a point even if you aren't using a Negative Lab Pro for your scans, so bear with me. Looking at the unconverted negatives first, the Harman RED negatives are extremely blue by comparison and much denser, and this colour comes from the cyan dye in the red sensitive cyan forming layer of the emulsion. And ignore those light leaks. Using Negative Lab Pro and just taking what you get, Lomo Redscale looks honestly atrocious, but Harman RED looks very good, just very flat and muted with very low saturation. In terms of sharpness, Lomo Redscale does beat Harman RED whether you're exposing at 100 or even 50, as it is based on a higher spec Kodak emulsion, but it does however have significantly coarser grain, higher contrast, and those famous blue speckles in the shadows. These are a very common and known problem with the Lomo Redscale film, and depending on your workflow, they can be quite hard to deal with in post. It even came up as like a subtopic on my Mi Amigos once. In my opinion, no matter how you slice it, Harman RED just scans more easily than the Lomo film does. Whether that's because of the exposure or otherwise, you're going to get nicer images with less work, at least with a Negative Lab Pro workflow. Even if you don't scan your own film, or if you do but you don't use Negative Lab Pro, the fact that you have a healthier dose of magenta as well as cyan from the green sensitive and red sensitive layers in the emulsion means you have a more versatile negative. Like I said, you have a lot more tonal range to work with rather than the choice of film dictating that completely for you. We're talking about color negative film at the end of the day. Versatility is part of the benefit and part of the point. The second thing I want to talk about in much less detail, much more quickly, is comparing normal development and pull processing, because this is something I wanted to do last year and I wasn't able to do it for the bleach, bypass and redscale video, and even here I was only able to do a real world test, so it's not really a one-to-one. These are both high contrast shots with side-lit, backlit subjects of vaguely similar sizes, so they'll do for the comparison. Looking closer at both of the images, there is definitely a reduction in the grain when you pull process, smoothing it out quite a bit, and it's the combination of both overexposure and underdevelopment that gives you that smoother grain, and it honestly works really well here. I shot the pulled shots at 80, and although there isn't a catastrophic reduction in grain like I saw when I pull processed in ECN2 like I did with Phoenix before, it's definitely a significant improvement, and I wouldn't hesitate to shoot this stuff pull processed. I mean, still being able to shoot it at 80 with less grain, big win. If you want to take the cynical route, yeah, Harman RED is just Harman Phoenix, but pre-redscaled for you. But that's not something to turn your nose up at. I showed you what the benefits are in terms of scratches, accurate DX code, not having to cut the leader and getting the full 36 frames, as well as just not having to do it yourself for what is hopefully going to be a very small price premium. It's also just a very technically competent film, and what Harman have done here is put this emulsion in a corner where its strengths truly shine. And I showed you that against at least its main competitor, It's better in every way except resolution, which is important of course, but one of the less important things about Redscale photography, you're getting more accurate negatives or more versatile negatives that give you a lot more tonal range in your scans, and you have a lot more room to play around with this stuff than you do with the Lomo film. And in exchange for that resolution hit, you're effectively getting a much higher usable film speed of 125 versus generously 25 to 50. Again, the better scanning versatility, hopefully broader availability, because Lomo seemed to be prioritizing direct to customer sales in the last number of months or year or so. And also just the fact that it's meant to be a little bit cheaper if things line up the way I think they're going to be. So if you're going to try Redscale photography, there really isn't anything better to try than Harman RED. I said it last year, but I can't oversell how good this emulsion is as a Redscale film. And I really am happy to hear that Harman agree with that, because yeah, in many ways, this is probably the best Redscale film ever made. Not every way by any stretch of the imagination, but in most of the important ways, I would say, mainly the colors. Again, I'm emphasizing that part because, you can Redscale any film you want at home. Most of them are not going to come out as well as this stuff. I'm very happy that Harman have made this stuff available, and it shows that they are looking at what their products could do rather than what they are, or how good they are at what they're trying to make them do. So maybe down the line we might see some more obscure, strange products, and I'm just speculating here. If they try and make something but find it's better at something else, if they make a film and find it's amazing when you E6 cross-process it, they could co-market it for C41 and E6 or something like that. I think it's about the mindset that they are actually looking at this kind of stuff, and that's very nice to see. I do wish that this would be available longer term and that it would be available in 120, but them's the breaks. Eventually we will be back to just the Lomo film, but while we have Harman RED, I'm really looking forward to shooting it. I have a couple of trips planned for spring and summer. I'm definitely going to shoot some of this stuff, especially for like moody landscape kind of photography. I also want to try it more for night photography, because those shots that I tried, which were both messed up for different reasons, hashtag lost of the role, forgetting to focus, did show a lot of promise. Really nice color palettes there, and the overall contrast was a lot more manageable than I thought it was going to be, which I'm very impressed by. So if you're going to shoot Harman RED, let me know in the comments or send me a message or whatever when you've done it, and I want to see your pictures, because there aren't that many people shooting Redscale film in general anyway, and if this gets more people doing that, then I'm absolutely delighted to see that. Thanks again to Harman Photo for letting me try this film out and for involving me in this to some degree, and to the rest of you, that's all I have to say for this video. So stay safe, and bye bye for now. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at shaka1277 for new pictures every day. If you liked this video and enjoy what I do on the channel, please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon, where the tiers start at just €1 per month.